Hi, everybody. Welcome to 5 and 15, a webinar series from C.O.nxt. You might have known us as Charles Norwig, where we promise to bring you 5 really important, interesting, amusing, we hope helpful bits of information, all within the constraints of a 15-minute webinar, because we know you are busy. I'm Mark Gale, Chief Growth Officer of C.O.nxt and chair of our ESOP board. Very proud of being 100% employee-owned ESOP. Truly, our employees benefit and they have extra incentive to do well for you, because when you do well, they do well. We really do believe in that. We focus on marketing and strategic communications, crisis, sustainability across the food system. End of commercial. To that end, though, our topic today, food and sustainability. We were talking and wondering, what are consumers thinking with all this craziness going on in our food system over the last year? We are kind of coming to a year now on COVID, we have. And so we partnered with our research colleague, esteemed colleague, Maeve Webster of Menu Matters, to do some research with consumers to see where the consumer mind is at related to food and sustainability and where it might be going and implications coming out of COVID. It's going to be a while, but we will get to the other side. So with that, Maeve, welcome to 5 and 15.
Thanks, Mark. Always happy to be here.
And we're always happy to have you. I always say, I'm always smarter after I talk to Maeve for a while. So
kind.
What we're going to do, and by the way, we will send you a copy of the research afterwards, the research report, sending your questions. If we don't get to the things you're interested in during, we'll follow up with some answers to you. First, we're going to go through a couple little research points, and then we'll talk a little bit about what some of this might mean. Now, Maeve, I'm got all my stuff spread out here, so I'm looking at it. Turns out the pandemic has not made people less concerned about sustainability. It looks like, and food, specifically food and sustainability, could be the opposite. Is that true? And were you surprised by that?
It is definitely true. And no, I wasn't surprised. Certainly sustainability kind of was pushed to a little bit of the background during the height of the pandemic because hygiene, sanitation, those types of issues became more important. That's when we saw more of the single-use plastics and all of that in an effort to be safer. But all of that also led to amazing imagery of how nature bounced back once humans were taken out of the mix and had to stay in lockdown, as well as all the pictures of single-use masks and all of these other plastics now littering the streets. So while hygiene certainly came to the fore as a result of the pandemic, all of that sustainability was constantly building up behind it and was important before we even hit the pandemic. So the minute hygiene becomes less of the critical issue that it was, sustainability is going to be right there to jump to the forefront again.
Yeah, when we knew we could get a pork chop, then we started to think about bigger things, or I could get my, no worry, I'm going to be able to get my Beyond Meat burger, whatever, people's preference was. Exactly. Then we started to think of the other things. Okay, yeah. Now, one thing I was interested to see is that a lot of people have thought about sustainability environment, and no, it's much bigger. We saw that really, for me, for the first time, kind of a broader base saying sustainability is a bigger issue. What kinds of things are consumers tying to sustainability now related to food?
Yeah, and that was something you and I had talked about before we even fielded the study, and I was not sure what we would get back. And you're right. So now consumers are increasingly rolling into the term sustainability, things like animal welfare, workers' rights, social justice, and all of these other broader issues into that term sustainability. And I think we're going to get to this, but what's also really interesting is part of that definition of sustainability is increasingly incorporating the idea that businesses that play in the sustainability area have to be profitable in order to make any of their sustainability efforts worthwhile. But that broader term of sustainability, I think, is both a boon and a hurdle for manufacturers and operators. It's great because then sustainability can mean almost anything that makes sense to your organization as long as you're transparent and very clear in your communication. but it's such a broad term now with so many catch-all issues now fitting into it that sustainability can easily become a term that stops in and of itself from being very impactful, kind of like all natural, which
Okay.
became used by everyone, didn't have a very clear definition, and suddenly stops meaning as much as it used to, as a term,
Okay.
as the individual term.
All right. Let's go a little bit deeper on a couple of those because, and for everybody listening, we are going to send you this whole report. So you'll be able to do some of your own analysis. We break it out by age group and such. So you'll be able to see some of that. To that idea of sustainability and food growing up beyond environment, one of the top scoring ones I know was ingredients tied to environment, but it wasn't environment first and then ingredient in a broad sense. It was much more specific to an ingredient. What's the heritage, if you will, or the integrity of a specific ingredient in food we saw? And then the other one, animal welfare. Now, we work a lot in agriculture. Work a lot in animal agriculture area. What kinds of things were people looking for specifically? And was it old people, young people, East Coast, West Coast?
Yeah, younger individuals are certainly leading this movement to expand the definition of sustainability. I was very surprised at the share of Gen X, my generation, and boomers who are buying into this notion that sustainability is not only tied to strictly environmental issues like water waste and pollution and soil health and that sort of thing. Boomers probably are really the followers here and being dragged along a bit by the other generations. But I think part of this is certainly, and to your point, the clarity of the conversation around what these mean, like ingredients with very clear backstories and very specific issues around animal welfare. I personally think a lot of that's tied to Gen Z and the type of generation Gen Z is, and they're a very realistic, down-to-earth generation, and all of that has probably been exacerbated now by the pandemic, which has forced everybody to be very realistic about expectations at the moment, that I think Gen Z expects not just transparency, but clarity. And your claims can't be vague, very catch-all, with very loose terms and no specific objectives. They need to be really clear as to what you are talking about, what your goals are, what your efforts are, in order for it to be believable and impactful.
Okay, now those are some of the age group differences that we were seeing. It was interesting to me that if the claims are specific, younger audiences are more likely to trust them than baby boomers are. That, in a way, didn't seem to make sense to me in some ways, of the younger audiences demanding more of food. We've known that for a while. They're tying other attributes. Yes, I mean, taste and cost and convenience. We know that those are still the kings and queens, but those younger audiences are tying other aspects to their decision making. But yet is it because if you give me specifics, I'll trust you? Whereas I saw baby boomers say, yeah, we're not so sure we trust companies. And usually it's the flip of that. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, so there, we didn't have a lot that specifically spoke to that, but here's the way I would look at that.
Okay.
Baby boomers are coming at it from realistic based on their past experiences, growing up and what was realistic. And so I think, I speak to my parents, for example, and I'll mention advances and efforts that certain companies are making. And their immediate reaction is, there's no way that is possible. It's going to cost too much. They're going to lose money. They won't be profitable. There's no way they'll be able to accomplish that.
So they're being more pragmatic,
pragmatic, but based on kind of their previous experience as to what was and was not possible. Whereas Gen Z is pragmatic, but pragmatic based on the idea that innovations are happening now and will continue to happen. And they're so tech-based that they both expect attainable and clear goals, and then also expect technology to keep up and drive the ability to meet those goals. So both generations are pragmatic, but I think boomers are pragmatic based on if they will forgive me, older perceptions of what was possible and what wasn't possible, whereas Gen Z is based very solidly in what is possible based on the advances that are happening in technology now.
I forgive you for your generality about baby boomers.
Right. Generalizations.
So what about younger audiences? And by the way, what was it, 2 or 3 years ago that Gen Z and younger displaced baby boomers as the major purchasing force and numbers in our society, which is something to pay attention to if you're selling food products out there.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Gen Z is a really fascinating generation, actually. I've been studying it more and more over the last couple of years, and the pandemic has really added a lot of complexity and nuance to that generation. They have been more impacted by pandemic driven layoffs and furloughs than any other generation, largely because they tend to make up a larger share of, let's say, food service workers and things of that nature. But they were also just coming out of college. They were just starting their career. So a lot of them haven't been able to get jobs with hiring freezes and things of that nature. Before the pandemic, they were already very personal wealth focused. And by that, I mean focused on ensuring that they are financially stable, that they're secure. So I think all of this is going to play into, again, their expectations from companies. If you're making a promise, you better follow through with it. If you are charging more for a product, it better live up to its promises and the value proposition that you've set up for that generation. They will expect it to meet it. I think they could potentially be very brand loyal if a company is both transparent and successful in meeting all of its promises. But I think they will very easily move on to other brands if you ever falter in your promises and your transparency with that generation.
All right. And given the digital world, they are going to find out.
That nobody, if
So
anybody thinks they can hide.
That better be a watch phrase for all companies within this realm. All right. Now we have a few minutes, but there's one that we have to get to.
Yeah.
And I'm reading it off the chart here from the report. Over half are willing to pay more for greater sustainability. And for the audience, by the way, half of what? Half of 750 consumers, actually a little bit more, closer to 800.
Yep.
I think specifically on this question, even across America. So that's a statistically valid number of people.
Yeah.
Over half are willing to pay more for greater sustainability. Now, we know that pricing research is a beast, because what people say they're going to do and what they really do are often two different things. Are we to believe that more than half of consumers, and especially the younger audiences, are willing to pay a little bit more for sustainability? Or are they just trying to be model citizens here? What do you think on that?
Yeah, so I think that certainly for the short term, and by that I mean probably through the end of the year, the amount that anyone will both be willing and able to pay more is probably going to be impacted by our economic situation.
Okay.
For a short-term period of time, their responses may be more aspirational than realistic. But I think after 2022 and on, I do think particularly the younger generations will be willing to pay more, again, for the clearer, more precise, transparent value propositions and promises that products are making. Then they will see the value, and they are generations that vote with their dollars and always have voted with their dollars. But I think the amount that they will be willing to pay more is going to be solidly grounded in the clarity and breadth of promises made for the products. If it's a vaguer, we promise to be better for the environment with very little details behind it, they'll probably will be not very willing to pay much more at all. But if you say we are going to hit these targets within these years, report out, and be very clear about what you're doing, why you're doing it, and how the consumer's behavior is going to help build into that and build a better world in the end.
Mm-hmm.
I think their willingness to pay more is going to go up commensurate with the promises that are made by the company.
Okay. And then we're coming on time here, but we'll go just a little bit long for people. And if you need to go, other people who are listening got it. We're going to send you this follow-up information, but a couple other little things would be, one, some social, you spoke to this a little bit, but ideas of worker safety, ability for food workers to have a sustainable living, including farmers. Are those reflections of the time we're in, or are people coming around to, given all that happened with, social justice issues last year, do you think that that's a change that is going to stick going forward?
I think that it was there was some groundswell before the pandemic, and we began to hear
Okay.
rumblings about these issues, but they weren't really on the forefront of the conversation. Clearly, after last summer, and this is not just from the social justice protests, but also from a lot of the discussion around worker safety during the pandemic, the outbreaks that were occurring in some meat processing areas. So I think all of that really took what was already beginning to kind of simmer below the surface
Okay.
and popped it right up to the top. And I do think that those issues will continue to be front and center in a lot of conversations around food, from agriculture all the way up to restaurants and end products at retail. I think they'll continue to be very important over the next few years, at least. Whether they have longevity in the conversations that we're having now, specifically beyond, let's say, the 5-year mark, we'll have to see how everything plays out. And I think the degree to which they remain front and center as issues will also be driven by the steps that are taken and achieved by the companies within the food channel to actually
Okay.
address a lot of these issues. If they're not addressed, expect them to persist as major, campaign issues. And by that, I mean, marketing and social campaigns. Expect them to persist. But if companies make pretty big strides and start making real significant movement in that area, then I think they may dissipate in, 2, 3, 4 years time.
Okay, so we'll have to watch that and see. And
Yeah.
so for a lot of these issues, trends were beginning to happen. In some ways, there was a little pause when people were worried about whether they could get, basic products from the grocery store. And
Yeah.
then we also had issues like issues in meatpacking plants, for instance, that caused some of this to bubble up, and maybe that's going to stick with us. Pretty
Right.
interesting. I can tell you from our clients, diversity, equity, inclusion, very big, in a lot of really good forward progress there, for example, which is kind of heartening to see.
Right.
Maeve, since we're out of time, is there anything, what would be, give us a couple quick hits for anybody in the business of somehow bringing food to market, growing it to serving it, carry out at a restaurant or dine in when everybody can do that. Give us a couple quick takeaways.
Yeah, so from an agriculture point of view, I think that there is definitely a heightened awareness and interest in the issues around farmers of all sizes. So I
Okay.
think that will definitely benefit agriculture and companies playing at that level in the food industry. And I think it will help them to gain additional awareness. I think it will impact their marketing and their positioning, certainly. I think from a restaurant point of view, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I know that consumers believe restaurants are doing a better job. So I think that that's good news. Now, a lot of restaurants are focused on survival right now.
Yes, they are.
But I do think that once we get past the survival stage, I think that restaurants will continue their good work. And I think that again, with their messaging, it's something that they can absolutely leverage. And I think very clear, ownable, competitive points of differentiation, particularly in the restaurant industry, will be critical over the next couple of years as we ramp back up. And, I think that the key thing, and this is something you and I have talked about, and I mentioned at the beginning, this idea that consumers are increasingly aware that businesses need to be able to make money while they try and hit their
Yeah.
sustainable targets. I mean, that is really critical. If I'm remembering the number, it was about a fifth of consumers. We're not talking about a majority, but
Yes.
my guess is that if we had run this 5 years ago with that same question, it would have been less than 10% would have been aware of that. And so I think that's good news for all players in the food industry who are trying to do good work towards sustainability, that there is an awareness that they have to be able to be profitable. And if they can't be profitable, it's not really worth anybody's time.
Yeah, and excuse my shuffling, but you're correct. It's just a little over 20%,
Yeah.
and you arguably growing are connecting that. Okay, if you need a company provider of food to me, you need to be profitable in order to do these things. And
Yeah.
also a little shuffling here, restaurants are generally seen as doing a very good job of
Yeah.
trying to be sustainable during this crisis. So with that, we're over. Maeve, fascinating speaking with you. Thank you.
Thank
For
you.
now, everybody, we'll get you the information. If you send in questions, we'll answer your questions. That's all for now from C.O.nxt. This is Mark Gale for 5 and 15. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate it and feel really great about being able to share this information with you. So have a good day. Bye-bye.